Please note that the following view may contain graphic descriptions of injuries and/or murders and may be upsetting to some viewers. Farm murders, a total onslaught against South Africa. This is part 1 of part of 2, and it's the ongoing story about farm attacks in South Africa with Urban Buck. Good afternoon, I'm Klaas and welcome to Urban Buck on Sunday the 5th of November 2023. When you start working with these cases, I started in June 2023 and a lot of the cases fast became very personal, very deep to me. You work with cases, you pick them up on X and you pick them up on Facebook, you pick them up on other media. And then you start researching for numbers and you start researching for actual case reports. And I came across a site called genie.com. Now, Genie is more about genealogies, but they've got other projects as well running, like the farm murders, which is one of their projects, and that records all the farm deaths in South Africa for the past, I don't know how many years. But in doing my research, I came across a case that I knew about, but I have long forgotten about it. On the 13th of June 1991, Aunt Stein was gunned down in her kitchen with an AK-47. That was prior or after her husband, Uncle Joos, was shot in the lounge where he was sitting in his favorite chair. Now, what time of the day this happened, nobody really knows, because there's not a lot of detail that actually goes into this. But one thing that actually was mentioned afterwards by the farm workers on the farm was that the intruders used banana guns, which is like sort of an acronym or another way of describing an AK-47. Now, if you look at AK-47, you see it's shaped like more or less like a banana, but it's much more dangerous than a banana. So we were quite close to the Steins. We went to church with him. Joshua was a bit older than us, but Daleen, the youngest daughter, she went to. She was actually in the rival school in the Lowveld, and but we knew each other. We went to Sunday school together. We sat alongside each other in church every Sunday. Auntie Ans sometimes came to visit with my mom. Uncle Joos, he was a farmer. And now, if you look at these people, you can still recall a smile. You can still recall a voice. You can still recall things that were said in conversations. And then you realize how deeply embedded these things, such as farm murders, has actually become in one's whole being. In this part 1 of part 2, or 2 parts, I'm going to discuss the historical perspective of farm murders in South Africa. That is from the, let's call it, the primitive times until 1994, when South Africa actually became independent per se. The very first farm murder in South Africa goes back as far as 1946, and that was when an unknown couple and a farm worker were murdered in KwaZulu-Natal Midlands in the Escort area. At that point, it was seen as a murder in normal law enforcement terms, so there was no connection to that. I mean, it's a year after World War II, so to connect it to a certain perspective or a certain background would have been virtually impossible. For the years 1960 to 1969, there were only 4 cases in South Africa of farm murders, of which 75% of these cases were the age of the murder victims were above 60. Now, I can say, yes, there's already now a tendency that one can look at as far back as 1960 or 1969 or the 60s, and then connect it to possible motives later on in years. But I think it's a bit too early to look at it at that way. Like I say, it was a normal murder in terms of law enforcement, and it can't be measured against a specific qualification. Terms were different at that stage. There were no threat against South Africa, and the world stage was post World War II, early 60s, uh, and not getting into a certain onslaught against South Africa in terms of what we experienced from the beginning of the 70s. Now, I'm not very good at the military history in South Africa in terms of threat for the 1970s. But later on, because I was part of the Defence Force for many years, I learned these things, and these things became part of me because I was a soldier. For the chapter 1970 to 1979, a total number of 10 farmers were murdered in various areas in South Africa. And even then, certain names that is also coming into play today has been identified at certain areas. But still, the definition or the connection with regards to what is really driving farm murders in South Africa was still not clear. In the 70s, mid-70s, we started becoming aware of a growing threat against South Africa by the African National Congress at that point. And there was a lot of silent cases or silent movements with regards to the African National Congress. I suppose your intelligence services knew more about this than they would actually give to the greater public. I mean, in the 70s, I was in primary school, so you had different interests, and instead of focusing on what's actually a threat in South Africa at the moment. At that point, one of the big things that was told to us as primary school kids is that we mustn't buy from a certain store because they might be feeding you drugs in the ice cream. So whether that was just scare tactics or whether it was true, it's difficult to say. If we look at the 10 farm murders in the chapter 1970 to 1979, like the 60s, very little was actually recorded on these farm attacks or murders, other than a name, a gender, and a birth date. But no specific reference to gunned down with this or attacked in that manner. So details were very vague, and I think it's also, with all due respect, it's a difficult task to go back onto newspaper articles of newspapers that simply don't exist anymore, and go and extract all that data, or go and speak to people that was actually alive or that was affected during those times. I think in terms of the threat that was starting to grow against South Africa, it was an easy target to move onto a farm with the purpose of to kill, maim, or rape. I mean, South Africa is not as extensive as maybe Australia or the United States, but the population diversity is actually an aspect that can be considered. But the rural farms at that point in the 70s, very far and very few between. You would find a farm over here, and maybe the next farm you would find 10 or 15 kilometers out. And with the accessibility with regards to roads at that point, very rural roads, to get there in a certain time from the nearest town to a hotspot or a crime scene would have been quite a bit of a challenge. Post 1994, South Africa went through a very extensive constitutional redevelopment, and one of the committees that was formed was the Parliamentary Steering Community on Rural Safety, and that should have been in place in the 60s already to see what what the focus was of farm murders. One would compare atrocities against farmers in those days, pre-1994, to what's taking place today. It's quite clear that the definition of today is quite accurate and quite applicable to those days as well. I'm going to go through the definition with you, and to give you an idea what we see, what the definition is for a farm murder, because this definition is very much going to be part of the what is being said in this production further on, and also in part 2 of these productions. I'm going to put the definition up on the screen so that you can follow with me, and maybe take a screenshot if you want to, and then for further reading if you want to investigate closer what the definition says. The National Priority Committee for Rural Safety defines a farm attack as follows. For the purpose of reporting acts of violence against persons living in the rural areas, including farms and small holdings, referred to acts aimed at persons residing in, working in, or visiting rural areas, whether with the intent to murder, rape, rob, or inflict bodily harm or intimidate. In addition, all acts of violence against the infrastructure and property in the rural community which is aimed at disrupting farming or other commercial concerns, irrespective of whether the motives are related to the commission or other crimes, ideology and land disputes, land issues, revenge, grievances, racist concerns, or intimidation, are included in this definition. So if we look at the definition, it's acts of violence against a person or persons living in rural areas, including farms and small holdings. So if you go outside of the town or the city limits, if you could put it as such, because let's say, for instance, in the United States, they call a town a city, and once you're outside of those defined limits, you are actually in a rural area. So that is aimed against people that is staying there, people that is visiting there, people that is actually working there. So that is defining who is included in this. Then it's the aspect of where there's intent or motive to murder, maim, kill, rape, inflict bodily harm, or intimidate. Intimidation is also a very serious thing, because there's a lot of intimidation, and I think on the previous stats video I spoke about an intimidation case as well in the Polokwane area. So the whole rural community, and there's a bit more development in the rural communities than there was in the 60s. But these things can now include ideologies, where the world is going now, where the world society is going. It can go about land disputes, land issues, and land disputes and land issues can sometimes be very, very inclusive of certain factors that you have no idea that it was actually included, or that it is perceived as being included in these things. There's racist concerns. Like I said earlier on, the population of South Africa is very, very diverse, and there's a lot of people on both sides, black and white, that's living in absolute peace and harmony. There's a lot of tolerance from both sides, and there's actually a lot of black people in South Africa that is actually promoting safety in South Africa, that's actually promoting economic progress in South Africa, instead of promoting destruction of economic growth and facilities. In the mid to late 70s, it became obvious that South Africa was starting to deal with a clearly escalating and a very fast escalating threat of terrorism on both urban and rural level. It was also during this time that the SADF of the time, the South African Defence Force, instituted compulsory military training to all male citizens between the ages of 18 to 25. Now, after such a period of 24 months or 2 years training, you still had to come back and do a 30-day camp here or a 90-day camp there, And then you were fed into the commando system, because you could also get the option of later on, when you were halfway through your camps, that there was the possibility that you could, instead of going from your hometown in the rural areas to a certain town in the metro areas, to go and do your 3 months camp over there, you could still go into the commando system, or you would be able to do a camp at the military base closest to where you stayed. So this built a lot of camaraderie amongst young South African men, because we came in long hair, young, we were boys, uh, finished school last year, and we walked out. Short hair, neat, disciplined, well disciplined. As somebody that served in that SADF and later on in the SANDF, I can tell you that there was a lot of strict discipline, and there still is a lot of strict discipline amongst the people that did training in those years. Unfortunately, this commando system, which came in very handy in terms of rural safety, was seen by the then Minister of Safety and Security, Charles Nkakula, as an apartheid tool, and the movement or the organization was disbanded over the period between 2003 to 2008. We lost a valuable tool over there. But on the plus side, the people that was part of that tool is still in existence. We are still disciplined people. We are still people that calls older people uncle and auntie. We still make sure that our lives are orderly. We still make sure that we maintain a certain level of discipline. Not to let yourself go, but to keep yourself at a certain level, instead of in terms of fitness, in terms of daily stuff that you need to actually keep you to a certain level where you can say that I am still capable of waging war. And for this same compulsory military training, the end conscription campaign, I think they were based in New York. They started lambasting South Africa, and even the international community, not so much the ECC, lambasted or criticized South Africa on a daily basis. And this developed inside South Africa as well, with a lot of young men deciding, you know what, I'm not going to do basic military training. So there was a lot of them that actually started doing military training in the DV, or the military compulsory military service, because it was written in the defense law at that point that if you do not do that, then you can be held criminally accountable for that. So with that, in terms of the people that we had on the ground, the movement that we had on the ground, together with that was also Resolution 234, I think, if I'm not mistaken, 234, 235, which was more concentrated on sanctions against South Africa, preventing us from actually importing armory or aircraft or any explosives from other countries, which, yeah, we managed to work our way around that as well. And when these threats started escalating, the SANDF actually started, sorry about that, SANDF actually started manufacturing own weaponry that was compatible to the South Africa situation, weaponry that was there to protect, and not so much as a defensive tool, but also as an offensive tool as well. There's a lot of things that we got exposed to as young children, and to give you an idea what the weaponry was like, or what we had to deal with on a daily basis, I'll give you let me put it up on the screen for you. During the 80s, this definition that I referred to a couple of moments ago became even more applicable, and We look at the acts and the characteristics of the acts at that time in South Africa, and at that point the ANC's military wing, Umkhonto we Sizwe, started becoming very active and also uh, taking responsibility for certain attacks. Now, what happened in South Africa, if you look at this posters like these, I mean, we were educated on a lot of levels. On every Friday, the school would have or an hour and a half or 3 hours, an hour and a half, 2 hours, dedicated to preparing the younger guys for military training, assisting in drill and uh, for the girls to do certain things to make sure that there's support for them to enter them into a support role for when they eventually leave school, so that they know what war was all about. Now, posters such as these, you'll see there, look and save a life. These are terrorists' weapons. You'll see at the top left, there's the old limpet mine and the smaller limpet there. Uh, some landmines. I'll get to that now. The stick grenade and some hand grenades there at the bottom. Now, these were things that was starting to become at the order of the day. And you look at how these things were actually employed to make our lives a bit difficult. The limpets were actually, there was a petrol refinery that was set alight with explosions from a limpet mine. Then the more dangerous thing that's lurking underneath the ground, the round objects on the right of the screen, which created havoc in South Africa. Just to make sure that we cover and just also stick to the subject of this video, being farm murders. During the 80s, we looking at farm murder figures, we see almost the same as modern farm murders. 1980, there were 3 farm murders. 1981, 5. 1982, 12 murders. 1983, 3 of them attributed to rural terrorism. Then 1984 there was 3, and for 1985 there was 23 again. Definitely noticeable if you look at the page like genie.com, you see that the tendencies or the motive of some of the deaths were definitely connected to terrorism or the influx of unwanted individuals carrying armament with them, with the idea to kill, maim, or carry out these atrocities that we had to deal with in the areas or the era prior to 1994. Almost the same time as these things, that was mid 1985, maybe even earlier than that, the South African defence industry was quick to design and manufacture anti-landmine vehicles, and this in turn also created an export market which generated a lot of needed income to build the SADF of the time. Now, a lot of these vehicles were, like I said, there were some exports of later vehicles because the quality of these vehicles were of exceptional standard. One of the earlier ones, the old Casper, you'll see that on the left, up on the left-hand side, which was used a lot by the police. And even now in unrest situations in urban areas, albeit in a different color, it's still being used by the police because of its sturdiness. Used by the Air Force as well, the Army at that point, for command vehicles. And then you see at the bottom right the old Rattle, which was a vehicle that could be converted into so many roles that it was absolutely unbelievable. A strong and sturdy vehicle that could carry troops, that could carry armament, that could do an offensive role as well as a defensive role. Now, if we look at the 23 victims during 1985, and you look into genie.com, you will find that there's 6 people that died in one incident. That was on a Sunday afternoon drive, game drive in the Messina area. The Van Eck and Donation families from Letsetele, which is further southwest of where this incident took place, were on a game drive, and they were visiting for the weekend, and they were on a game drive when the light vehicle that they were traveling with detonated the landmine. The people that died was Jacoba or Kobie van Eck, she was 34, Ignatius Michael van Eck, he was 2 years old, Nelmarie van Eck, 8 years old, Getreida Donation, 56, Johannes Donation, he was 3 years old, Carla Donation, 9 years old. Out of the 6 of them, 2 adults and 4 children. Now, they would have been in their late 40s by now, if I count correctly. Now, if you look at where Messina is, that's in the north of South Africa, close to the Zimbabwean area. And it was accepted that these dissidents actually infiltrated from Zimbabwe. And that wasn't the only incident in that time. I mean, that was just before Christmas. That was on the it was 2 weeks before Christmas. I think it was the 13th of December 1985, if I'm speaking under correction. But those were not the only ones. Like I say, they were defense force or military forces, security force people that died in that same incident. And then just after that, just after Christmas, on the 29th of December, Elizabeth de Beer and her father Herbert de Beer, they both died in the same type of incident when the light vehicle that they were traveling with on the western side, again on the Botswana side of South Africa, detonated the landmine. They were killed instantly. So that's why it became necessary for the South African Defence Force at the time, or the South African military industry, to start looking at anti-landmine vehicles that could actually not save your life per se, but sort of give you a better edge of preserving your quality of life during a landmine incident. There were prominent incidents of these, and I'll show it to you now. I'll put it up on the screen. But then, just to get the other aspect covered, if you look at things, what things are like in politics, there were allegations from the South African Defence Force or the South African government that at that point Zimbabwean President Robert Mugabe was actually housing these dissidents in Zimbabwe. He denied it. So these things don't happen because he wouldn't be involved in that. But yeah, there was sufficient proof for that. And there were also a big headquarters for the ANC in Lusaka. So the threat against South Africa was there, but the denial from people that was actually housing the threat was like even modern day politics. It was there. Now, it wasn't that these things went unnoticed outside South Africa. You can see there, on the 16th of December 1985, that was 2-3 days after the incident, when the New York Times reported on this. Then a message or an article about the burial of the people in the town of Letsetele, and that was by the Washington Post, and even as far west as the LA Times, where they spoke about the mine blast that killed Elise de Beer and her father Herbert de Beer a couple of days later. For the rest of the 80s, there was an additional 46 more people killed in South Africa in rural areas. A lot of these deaths weren't so much in the cities or urban areas, it was more rural areas because of the vulnerability and the close proximity to borders that could actually facilitate an escape after an attack. The 90s were no better. And even if it was part of the struggle and it was concluded, in the years after Nelson Mandela was released from prison, uh, uh, never gave the idea that the struggle was now concluded. Because there's actually a much bigger picture behind this than just a struggle to get a democracy settled in South Africa. Since its release on February 11, 1990, it seemed as if farm murders were encouraged rather than stopped. I'm going to show you a couple of figures. I'm going to put it up on the screen for you. 1990, 28 people killed in rural areas, amongst which a lot of them were farmers. 1991, 36. 1992, 66, as was recorded by the South African Agricultural Union. They actually started keeping stats from 1991, and in the end of this video I'll give you an idea of how many they actually noted for the period, which I will mention as well. 1993, 87 people. Now, you would ask, if that's the number for 1993, are we actually moving towards a so-called independence in South Africa, democracy in South Africa, if the numbers just keep going up? They're up for 1994, and that is up until March 1994, with the elections held in April 1994, and then Nelson Mandela being sworn in as president on the 10th of May 1994. Now here's the question. Did it stop after 1994? No, it did not. On May 10th, 1994, Nelson Mandela was inaugurated as South Africa's first black and democratically elected president. This did not mean the onslaught against South Africa was now over. Farm murders and attacks continued. In the first 3 months after the inauguration of Nelson Mandela, 17 people were murdered in rural areas in South Africa. From the first records of farm murders in South Africa up until March 1994, 247 farmers, including spouses and children, were murdered on farms in South Africa. Of these, 137 people were above the age of 60. I might say age is in fact, but you might say it's speculation. But there's relevance. If you've been farming for 20 years, and from that farm your children went to school in the nearest town, and then from there on went on to go and attend university, becoming a lawyer or a doctor or a minister or an engineer or whatever profession they chose to follow, do you think they would really, after you have been murdered on your farm, uproot in the city and move over to go and take over from you after your murder, after your death on the farm? I don't think so. And then one question that came up, what happens to this land? Even in those days, even in many years, since the 60s, what happened to that land? So, and I'm going to give you a link in the description box afterward. The other thing that comes into play are areas that is very prevalent for farm murders. We look at the mid-Free State farms, Brandfort, Verkeerevlei, which is more, there's a lot of sheep farming there. You look at Balfour, Grootvlei, which is sort of South Africa's Millibelt, but also the Millibelt is situated on top of areas that is very rich in coal. Balmoral, which is close to Witbank, also coalfields. Standerton, some of the most pristine pasturage areas are there, especially sheep, a lot of cattle, and also areas of the Northwest Province, diamonds, the Eastern Cape, which one would wonder what minerals are actually there, that those areas would be targeted, and there would be an attempt to drive people, farmers, off those lands. And then now recently the Western Cape. Although the real thing that's happening in the Western Cape is that the people in Cape Town, they now want to become independent from the rest of South Africa. So I don't know if there's an attempt to stop those people, or stop the influx of people into the Western Cape, by introducing farmer tax. If you do take into consideration the coal fields of Mpumalanga and the northern KZN areas, like I say, which are rich in coal, and a commodity which is very sought after in a lot of countries, irrespective the move towards green energy, uh, then if we consider the Mpumalanga area, which is like sort of between the Joburg, Pretoria areas, the more urban areas, and the Lowveld, which is more your fruit production and your forestry, and beyond that, Mozambique, where there's a big harbour, a very operational harbour. Then, and you measure that against the move for greener energy, then why is South Africa's coal still so sought after? Uh, so a lot of people would say that this green movement is a whole lot of BS. But if you look at, and they would defend that, but if you look at our 30-ton trucks are standing three abreast next to the road, waiting to get through customs to go and deliver the coal at a point just on the other side of the border, at the town of Komatipoort. Then you start thinking, because that coal is again exported towards the Far East, Japan, and those areas, and yeah, you can imagine what that would mean. Also, the other factor is if you look at the involvement with by very connected political persons in South Africa, with prominent figures directing the world on a new course, then you start thinking about what is actually going on in South Africa. Food security will come into play in the near future. Like I say, if you get murdered on your farm, who's taking over your farm? And I'm going to direct you to a production of a friend of mine with regards to farmer tax. And it was an eye-opener. Now, I must warn you beforehand, Colin swears a lot, but he also does a hell of a lot of research, and he's somebody that is worth watching his videos. This video is worth watching. I'm going to put it down in the description box, but if you do miss it, go and have a look at farmer tax in South Africa. What is really going on? Is there a sinister plan behind it? That's the topic of it. And please try and have a look past what people identify or perceive as obnoxiousness. This man is really excellent at his job, and this production is worth looking at. Thank you for watching this. The normal thing that I do at the end of the month on a Sunday afternoon are the statistics. I have a meeting later on tonight finalizing the statistics for the month, the murders and farmer tax stats for the month, and I will most probably do that in the first half of the week. The presentation or the video, or the script for the video is already done. It's a couple of things that needs to be added, and then I will let fly with that. And then please like, subscribe, and ring that little bell thingy, because if the next if this part 2 comes in, then you can have a look. If my English are putting you off, it's not my first language. It's sometimes it's a bit of a handicap, but I get along. So please have a look and wait for that second part of this video, which is taking us forward from 1994 up until where we are in 2023. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on nitty-gritties, but I'm going to highlight a couple of things. It's of utmost importance. It's very relevant. And yeah, unfortunately, if you have a problem with the, like I said, the warning in the beginning, if you have a problem with the gory details, that one will have it, definitely. From me, Have a great Sunday afternoon and the rest of the week. I'll speak to you soon.